Hello everyone, and welcome to our video presentation on finance. I'm here today with Shaun Cooper, one of our EMC's AVPs. My name is Ed Ward. I'm a physician here at Rush. I have a couple different leadership titles, and what we're here today to discuss is how a practitioner, a clinician, can interface with a finance guy in order to try to get a project approved, or how we can better work together so that I can get the things I need for my patients, for my department, and Shaun can partner with me to try to get me the resources I need, right? Yeah. So our first question, hold on, is how do I make a business case to get resources? Because again, the background is I'm really good at taking care of patients and meeting their needs and the family's needs, but how do I go and get something new, get a new hire, a new piece of equipment, having virtually no financial background at all?
Well, I'd say it would start with kind of understanding like what you're asking for. So is this something we do with existing that we're just going to expand, or is this something new that's completely, we have no history on, so we actually need to build it from the ground up as far as what's it going to cost, the revenue, estimates around equipment. So there's usually two sides to every, what I would call a business plan. There's the capital side of the house and then the operating side. The capital would focus mainly on any equipment renovation, large-scale costs to get this program off the ground and running. And then on the operating side, those are the costs that would maintain the operation on a go-forward basis. So this would be what people do you need to help run the service, any type of large supplies, other disposable type of equipment that would be used in the day-to-day of the service. So if we take an example of we want to expand something that we're doing already, we would first want to start with what's the historical experience on it. So we'd want to look at what type of volume do we have, and let's start with the revenue that it currently generates.
Okay, so again, I think that's good, right? Because I mean, I can think of a scenario. I just want to hire another doctor.
Sure.
And I've got an idea of what a doctor costs. I mean, I know my own salary, right? So I could look at this and say, it's this type of problem, right? But without the kind of experience that you've got, I'm not going to think of those other different things like clinic space or the assistants that go along to help with that, right?
Yeah, so I mean, it just starts with a good conversation with the people that are familiar with the operation. So if you want to expand a current service and bring on a new physician recruitment, I mean, obviously the people are the most costly piece of the equation. And from their standpoint, you'd want to project how many individuals you need, physician, nurses, support staff, etc. And then from that, what would be the expectations for that individual as they ramp up their practice? So you can look at historically, you can say in the past, first year we've been at maybe 50 or 60% of that person's capacity, and then go up from there. But the pieces around that is, I mean, that's what they could do, but the answer of what they actually will do is different, because that obviously involves other factors like the market. The market might require not as many people because it's already being served by other health systems in the community. So ideally, you have to factor in multiple things. So it's just not what can the person do and what's it going to cost, but also what's the realistic ability for that person to ramp up and be productive.
Well, along that, so here's something I would not have thought of initially, right? So I think of, I hire this new person, they come in, they start working. What is like the return on investment time frame? Like, because again, it would be hard in different practices to get someone hit the ground running and be able to, justify their cost. So how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of the project. So if it was a much larger scale project where you're building a new building or putting in a new electronic medical record system, I mean, those are going to have many, many years to take time to sort of return its investment. But on something that's more discrete, you would look at a return period that would hopefully be, between at least years 2 and 3 that you're going to get that return on. And simply what that means is that initial investment that you put forward to get that service up and running, and then the financial returns of that investment being able to cover those initial costs within a certain time period. So ideally, if it's a recruitment, you would hope that it would be, maybe between 2 and 3 years at most. And some it might be much quicker depending on the type of service, but ideally, as an organization, we build our financial projections around how our current operations are. So think of it this way: any new investment, obviously, that has a short-term deterioration on the financials, but obviously on the longer term has a much larger benefit for the financials.
Okay. So maybe to take a step back, as a clinician, I'm really good at being able to get clinical questions answered, right? So, how do I identify my own area? Who is my Shaun Cooper? Who is my AVP that I need to go talk to?
Yeah, well, ideally, if you're in a clinical department, you would hopefully have an administrator that is that contact, and that person should hopefully understand a little bit about your current operations, the volumes, the payer mix, which would be the insurance breakdown, the types of billing or CPT code activity that you would have in your area, but then also a good understanding of what it takes to run that service. So what type of support staff do I need, what type of equipment, what type of supplies, so therefore you can sort of build in the total cost of ownership for whatever you want to actually start.
Okay. All right, so again, to kind of speak to a clinician who does not have the, I studied anatomy and chemistry, I didn't study profit loss, but I imagine at some point, if I'm going to be able to partner with you to get a new resource, I'm going to have to know the impact of patient care. So I hire a new doctor, an ER doctor can see, let's say, 3,000 patients in a year, right? I don't know how much those patients are going to bring back in. At some point, I'm going to have to look at profit loss statements. Like, what is it that I need to go, what do I need to know about a profit loss statement so I can have this kind of conversation with you so that you'll be able to comfortably support what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, so ideally, with any kind of profit loss thing, you're trying to evaluate revenue and expense. On the revenue side, if you had some estimates around the volumes that would incur based on this investment, you could project what those costs would be, and you would model in there the different payer percentages that you would see based on which insurance companies. And from that point, you provide this service, it yields this service from a revenue standpoint. On the cost side, obviously, if you have to bring on someone new, you want to add in all those salaries, and typically in any organization, labor is the largest expense in any organization, followed by either supplies or malpractice. So building in all those costs to identify what will sort of essentially be my bottom line, given the fact that it takes a number of years to ramp that service up. If right away we have a backlog and to fill some spot, the ramp up is maybe a year, then I'm sure that the returns on that would be much better. But if it's a new service or a service that right now has a lot of competition in the marketplace, it might take multiple years or longer to ramp up. And you need to essentially have what's called a sensitivity analysis, and that would sort of model it out under multiple perspectives, whether you have a fast ramp up, maybe a medium ramp up, a slower ramp up, but also take into account if the patient population that you're tending to see might have a different payer mix than others. So you want to take into account multiple different factors and therefore understand from a financial standpoint, it might mean this or might mean that. But ideally, not every investment will have a positive return on investment. Obviously, we're doing things to improve quality and safety that just are important to do regardless of the financial benefit of it. So there's multiple things to take into account.
Well, so can I ask you this, and I don't know if there's a real solid answer for this. I can guess what a provider's salary is going to be, right? And I over the course of the years, I was told there's something we're going to cover for fringe and overhead.
Right.
Is it a percentage of that? Like how do, because in my head, what I want to be able to, again, I want to have a productive meeting with you to say, Shaun, I want to hire this, and I think it's going to cost this amount. How do I get to, what does that cost?
Sure. So for any type of position that you hire, typically there would be a benchmark salary range for that individual based on either their rank, their tenure, years of experience, and from that you can kind of come up with their base salary. But then every organization has costs associated with those salaries, like fringe benefits, and that would include your health, your dental, your retirement type of costs. With that, it can range anywhere between, say, 21, 24%. Some organizations are much higher, but ideally, that on top of any salary that you would bring into the organization, you'd want to layer on top of that fringe benefits, both for provider as well as staff.
All right, so that would cover the cost part of this, right? How easy or how difficult is it for me to figure out how much did I bring in to this organization?
Well, if you're going to look at any individual from a historical standpoint, if the person is billing under their own provider ID, you can pull data that would show what those reimbursements or those payments are that we receive for that service. And from that, again, it would vary depending on the insurance company, but also depend on the different service that you're providing. So if it's a level 1 visit, obviously it's going to be reimbursed at a different level than a level 4 or 5. So you'd want to model out the types of activities that this individual would see, and then from that you could then project the revenue over a course of a number of years as they ramp up.
All right, so how do we factor in just the changes in healthcare, right? So at some point, you know, a couple years ago, we had the Affordable Care Act, and what we saw in my own unit was patients who didn't have insurance now having insurance and coming in, right? And that may change. You know, though, you know, there may be more uninsured. So how are we able to overlay a 3 or 4 year projection, right, with the changing healthcare environment? Like, how do you, as a finance guy, keep that in mind before you say, yes, you can do this, or we have to think about this differently?
Yeah, well, ideally, I mean, you'd want to start first with your governmental payers, which would be either Medicare or Medicaid. And ideally with Medicare, any type of changes in reimbursement that would be, we'll say, positive, would be very minimal, like 0.5%, 1%. I mean, they have very moderate increases. With Medicaid, typically, under the traditional Medicaid plans, which was before they got into the Medicaid managed care world, you were really seeing no increases. You were just seeing kind of, we'll call it static payments. However, the challenge on the Medicaid side is that, at least within the state of Illinois, the current fiscal situation of the state, those payments came in extremely slow. So it would be not uncommon for us to see payments 9 months after a service is provided at a cost that is below, unfortunately, what it actually costs us to provide the service. So if you start with Medicare and Medicaid, that would represent maybe up to 50% of the activity that you would see, again, depending on the service. But then on the other side, on the managed care side, ideally, we would model it out based on reimbursement rates that are higher than Medicare and Medicaid. And typically there's a range that we would like to get to, but it would be some multiple of Medicare.
Okay. So here's one of the mistakes I've made a couple of times in my career here, right? I have a great idea and we need to get either some new equipment or I want to hire someone new. And what I'm familiar with is the educational graduation cycle, right? So at the end of June, doctors finish their residency programs, and it becomes very easy to find a pool of applicants that will come and join us, you know, July 1st or shortly thereafter, right? As we backtrack that, I really need to know, you know, what's our ability to hire. I mean, really, October, right? October,
sure.
November would be great. If you wait too long, then the good candidates actually job somewhere else. So what kind of deadlines are there, or you know, things within the calendar year that I need to be aware of so I can time my requests so that you're going to have enough time to be able to look at this and say, yeah, it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, and give me the approval for what I'm asking.
Well, I would hope if an area really wanted to move forward with a new recruitment based on, you know, a strategic plan that says, hey, I want to grow or I want to add this service, and they're looking to recruit at least maybe from more of a fellowship pool, someone coming right out, they'd want to know in the fall, because ideally that fellowship interview period is probably starting in the fall and maybe ending in the winter time frame. So just to bring in candidates, you'd want to be able to make sure that you have an approved position. So I would start, yes, kind of as the year's starting, working within your department, understanding what strategically we want to do and what it's going to take to do that. Now, there's obviously situations where you might be looking to recruit someone that is more of an opportunistic thing, where they're not necessarily coming out of a training program, they maybe are just a local candidate or coming from a different market. So the timing on that could be a little bit different. But I ideally say in any model, if you want to grow, you'd want to know in the fall that you want to do this for the next fiscal year, which would start in July. And then from that standpoint, go through the internal approval process to get that recruitment approved. And that would be you as a department putting together a pro forma that ideally puts together all the things that we've been talking about. Who do I want to bring on? What are the costs associated with that? What's the type of revenue that we'd expect? What's the ramp up on that? And ideally come up with this, what I call a 3-year plan for that recruit. And then from that standpoint, that would go to the organizational approval process to get approved, and then ideally the recruitment then can start.
All right, so give me a best case scenario. I have a great idea, and it's the first of a month, right? You know, how fast can we do just what you articulated? How fast can I mean, I send you with, Shaun, this is a great idea, here's what I need to do, right? What do you think is a fair amount of time for me, a reasonable time to say, is it 1 month, is it 2 months? Well, when can I actually get the approval to say, yes, go ahead and send a letter of intent off to this guy and get him in here?
Well, I think, I mean, you as a department will create the sense of urgency, but I would say it falls into two categories. If it's a category where you're not having to bring on a lot of additional resources or request a lot of capital, you know, you could probably start it in the early part of the fall and get it approved in the fall. So I'd say from start to finish, a month to month and a half.
Okay.
And that's where the chair of the area is signing off. That's where you're meeting with the various missions within an organization, whether it's the medical group aspect, the hospital aspect, the research aspect, to get all of those various signs of approval as well. And then being able to actually recruit for that person. And that piece, you know, again, just depending on the competitive nature of that specialty, you know, it may need to start earlier than others. I mean, it needs to pivot off of that as well. But for a recruit that may require a lot of additional resources to be put into the model to be built, where like they might require to renovate space, where you now have to find space. Mm-hmm. Then you have to put together a construction timeline and estimates around what it would cost from an equipment standpoint. Those are projects that could take 3 months. Uh-huh. And that's just to get the whole plan kind of going before you even sort of maybe start that official recruitment or not. But again, if something is opportunistic or for an organization it's a great idea, I mean, people can mobilize to get that going a lot quicker, but to do it under a time frame that allows the right checks and balances to get all the different parties involved, I'd say the quickest you could turn something around would be, yeah, maybe 30 to 45 days.
Okay, all right.
And that's pretty fast, I'd say.
Yeah, you know, I'm just trying to think, like, for replacements, that's usually like the easiest thing.
Yes, if it's a straight replacement,
right.
That would fly through just based on, again, evaluating, again, this is still a need, but also just evaluating that, you know, like, from an investment standpoint, it's like situation than the past.
Right, and then for novel ideas, something we're doing different, that just gets more complicated.
Exactly.
So it's really going to take a lot more information to be able to make a good choice.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if what you're looking to expand is aligned strategically with what the growth initiatives would be, then it can move along a lot quicker because, I mean, as an organization, if our area is to focus on a certain number of areas, and this is aligned with that, is a great idea, obviously we want to continue to create those types of catalysts to grow the organization.
Okay. All right, so last question. Another thing that's come up a couple years, a couple times in the course of my career here, is I have a great idea, and I've identified a need that our patients need or our staff needs, and I'm able to actually make a pretty articulate case for why we should move in this direction. But you know, resources are limited, and we can't you know, move in every direction all the time, right? So I've had a couple projects that get rejected for a variety of reasons. You know, not that they're bad ideas or not that they can't be successful. What are your recommendations to me? Because you know, if I'm able to identify that my patients need something, well, they need it. And how do I like shelve this, or how do I get it so that I can go back to it another day and take another swing? You know, and try to get the thing done in another day when maybe it's time to you know, it's a better time for that kind of project.
Yeah, I mean, I would think with any request that comes up, I mean, ideally it's never going to follow the right calendar cycle that you can sort of get it approved and hopefully get it included. But if something comes up mid-year that is an important thing, I mean, ideally it's helping to build that justification not only from the benefits that it would provide, whether, you know, improves quality, patient safety, helps us grow in an area right now where we're capacity constrained, or allows us to expand in an area that we don't have. But ideally, I mean, it's building that case, including all the things that go along with it. So does it require capital? Does it require operating expenses going forward? Does it need to have multiple different areas support it? Is it strategically aligned? So I guess the case for the individual is building that case and being able to show all the different things that go along with it, and hopefully being able to provide that message to leadership to help get that approved. The challenge is that just like your great idea, many different people have great ideas. So it's a difficult situation to be in, that we have multiple areas to evaluate, and from that we can only pick a handful based on available resources, whether it's dollars or just institutional bandwidth and capacity to get stuff done. So that's the hard part. So, I mean, all ideas obviously are great in some form or another, but yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. I'll give you one example. From the capital standpoint, what we're able to support from a capital standpoint, probably has $1 available for every $3 that are asked. So that just means that from that standpoint, a smaller group of projects are going to move forward just based on our institutional ability to support certain different things.
All right, so can I ask you this? I'm sorry, I said last question, but I have one more
Yeah.
question, right? All right, so can you give me some tips on, so I was one of the $2 of requests that we didn't
Sure.
have,
Yeah.
right? But I'm gonna come back to you next year. What's my time frame? How should I package this to get it to you so that I have a better chance the next year or the year after that to get the project done?
Got it. So the current timing, if this is a capital request, those business plans, like what's involved supporting that capital, ideally should be completed and hopefully been given sort of the checkoff from your leadership in that area prior to December.
Okay.
And that way, in the month between December and the end of January, those individuals can put those projects forward to be considered for prioritization.
Okay.
And that's when the institutional right now is evaluating all the different projects that we have. So thus, we can then, as an institution, come back to you by March and say, your project's been green-lit. Here is now the operating support that is needed to be incorporated into your budget, which would then be done between March and April. So the timing is capital goes first, whatever gets approved, then we get the operating support that's required for it. That could be incorporated into the next fiscal year.
So prior to December 1st
Yeah.
is ideal, okay?
Yeah, I mean, and that way, you as you first say you as a local area can highlight your priorities. Those priorities can then be elevated to the person that would oversee that area, and then those can be put into the overall institutional request list. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Shaun.
Yeah.
Super helpful, I
No
appreciate
worries.
it, all right?
Take care.